From the early stage of civilization, dreams about a just order have been at the core of human history. Much have changed over the course of centuries, but these dreams preoccupy us today just as much, not more, as they did millennia ago. As in the past, they revolve around the issue of power. What is an equitable distribution of power? What political order can bring about such distribution? How can we organize our life so as to achieve such equitable distribution? These and similar questions have preoccupied us for a very long time. There have been repeated attempts to achieve this goal, numerous upheavals and revolutions. Yet, despite much suffering, many human lives lost, we're still no closer to achieving this goal than we were centuries ago. Few traditions have devoted more attention to this monumental task than the tradition of the Enlightenment. This tradition has dominated and continues to dominate our civilization for the last 2.5 centuries. The belief in the reason, our capacity for rational thought, is the focal point of the Enlightenment. Those who embrace this tradition hold firm to the conviction that the power of our mind is infinite, that there are no problems we cannot solve, no limits that we cannot overcome. Humans, in their view, can and should use this power to organize social life in a way that is rational, equitable, and just, and that would bring freedom, prosperity, and happiness to all members of society. Such was the dream that inspired great French Revolution, the American Revolution, and many other revolutions that have followed. Considering the main preoccupation of the Enlightenment project with politics and society, power has naturally been one of its main foci. Thinkers of the Enlightenment argued that using reason and rationality to control and guide power was the essential condition of human emancipation. They pursued this goal. The pursuit of this goal has been relentless. It has produced many remarkable theoretical breakthroughs, has in many ways shaped our current political and social order. Yet, despite many significant achievements, the project of the Enlightenment has failed to achieve its goal. That goal has proven to be elusive. Reason and power do not appear to be any closer to each other today than they were during the age of reason. Moreover, some even argue that the Enlightenment tradition is degenerating in some earlier forms of social organization. Michel Maffesoli, for example, argues that postmodernity is characterized by the abandonment of individualism and the reversion to neo-tribalism and nomadism. Others see the reinvigoration of the influence of atavistic archetypes, whose powerful influence on our civilization Carl Jung discussed in. Why has the Emancipation Project not been realized? Can it be realized, and if so, how? In order to understand why the project has not been successful, we need to take a look at some fundamental aspects of the general approach that the Enlightenment tradition has used in pursuing this project. I will use for this analysis the works of Jürgen Habermas, one of the most important contemporary advocates of the. Like many others, Habermas sees exclusion as the source of domination, and consequently, for him, as for many others, the realization of the Emancipation Project consists in the elimination of exclusion. However, critics point out that Habermas's theoretical perspective does not eliminate exclusion as related, for example, to women and minorities. Why does exclusion persist in the theoretical perspective advanced by Habermas? In his solution to the problem of exclusion, Habermas emphasizes the need to enhance the role of communicative action in the public sphere, where the formation of political opinion and will take place. Communicative action is oriented towards the object, and motivated by objective knowledge rather than private interests and the self. It is in the interest of communicative action that those who operate in the public sphere form a consensus that reflects their common political opinion and will. The guiding principle in the formation of this consensus is the force of a better argument. That is, an argument formed in and empirical verification. These criteria imply that Habermas accepts our capacity for conscious reasoning, our consciousness, as the primary ontological reality and the supreme arbiter in determining what has true value. Our conscious capacity is what, according to Habermas, enables us to gain an objective view of reality and establish universal validity and thus eliminate exclusion and domination. Strategic action, one that is oriented towards the subject and is motivated by particular and egotistic interests, is, according to Habermas, an obstacle to unimpeded exercise of communicative reason. In setting the strategic reason in opposition to the communicative reason, Habermas follows the dualistic pattern that recognizes the subject and the object as ontologically separate and diametrically opposed to each other. This opposition is characteristic for the entire Enlightenment tradition. The Enlightenment tradition offers no rational justification or empirical verification of this proposition, but accepts it as foundationally given, or what Kant called synthetic a priori judgment, what we commonly call self-evident truth. The absence of rational justification and empirical verification for this proposition signals a fundamental lack of control in the entire edifice of the Enlightenment tradition. The fact that the Enlightenment tradition does not provide a rational justification for the subject-object relationship does not mean that this relationship cannot be justified. In fact, one can provide a rational justification and empirical verification for the view opposite to the one in the Enlightenment tradition. This view states that the subject and object are not ontologically separate, but rather they're closely related to each other. They both come from the same source, the process of creation. Indeed, our comprehension of reality requires the creation of mental structures capable of interpreting electric signals that we receive from our senses. Thus, in order to comprehend reality, we need to construct our mental structures that allow us to interpret electric signals in our brain, which means that as we construct our mental, or what we commonly identify as ourself, we construct at the same time that which we see as external reality. Without such interpretation, we would not be able to see anything. The fact that we see reality rather than see nothing is a logical proof that there is a fundamental connection between our inner self and external reality. Piaget, in his studies, Origin of Intelligence, Children, provides empirical evidence for this theoretical proposition. As we change our mental construct, we also change our conception of reality, and vice versa. Thus, we have a rational justification and empirical verification for the proposition that the subject and the object are not opposed to each other, but are actually two interrelated entities. Habermas embraces Piaget's. However, in appropriating Piaget, he departs from the original. His perspective does not include the process of creation that is central to Piaget. In contrast to Piaget, Habermas completely disregards the process of creation and posits the conscious and rational intellect, the product of this process, as the primary ontological reality. In other words, reason, the product, emerges as the primary ontological reality in its absolute and universal capacity. As a result, Habermas relegates the subjective side of reason, individual consciousness, to a secondary, subordinate, and consequently less important role. That is why he thinks of the subjective manifestation of such as gender, ethnicity, culture, etc., as inferior to what he sees as the ultimate ontological reality, the objective reason. In other words, he denigrates subjective self. This denigration breeds the exclusion of various forms that our subjective self may take as less essential and less important. And exclusion, as Habermas agrees, is the source of domination. Thus, by excluding the process of creation from its frame of vision, the Enlightenment tradition produces an incomplete and very defective view of reality, a view that opens the path to exclusion and domination. But is there a way of resolving the problem of exclusion and domination? Can we realize the Emancipation Project? As has been argued, we can trace the persistence of exclusion in Habermas's theory, and by extension, the Enlightenment tradition, to one fundamental cause: the failure to make the process of focal point of the frame through which we view reality. If that is the case, then we can solve this problem by making the process of creation the main focal point of the frame that we use to view reality. What effect will this integration have on our view of reality? The choices that will become available to us, and the actions we. What social and political forms will emerge as a result of our new vision? A short presentation cannot provide detailed answers to all these questions. Such answers would require efforts by many individuals. This presentation will necessarily have to limit itself to most general remarks and observations. The first observation one should make is that the process of creation does not work on the basis of consensus. That is, by emphasizing commonalities and excluding difference. On the contrary, differences play a very productive role in this. In the course of creation, differences are not suppressed or eliminated. The creation of their early development, children combine different and incommensurate sensory motor functions to create a new form of organization, symbolic thinking. This example shows that the process of creation works by combining difference into a new and more powerful level of organization, thus conserving them as its particular cases. As I have argued elsewhere, we can view the process of creation as a system in its own right. As a system, the process of creation contains all other systems it is capable of creating: past, present. The new and more powerful levels of organization produced by the process of creation offer new and more powerful possibilities. They also provide more powerful tools for realizing these possibilities. In other words, the process of creation creates power, and this power empowers us. Thus, the process of creation is the source of power. If inclusion is the source of power, then by excluding difference and creating conditions for domination, we diminish our power. Power and domination have nothing in common. They're actually opposed to each other. The exclusion of people and ideas inhibits the process of creation and reduces power that could be otherwise produced by integrating difference. The power generated by the process of creation offers new possibilities and new choices that enhance our freedom. It is for this reason, some argue, that power is integrally connected with freedom, while exclusion and domination are not. Since exclusion and domination do not produce power, they cannot compete with inclusion that generates power. By enhancing the process of creation and generating more power through inclusion, we can eliminate exclusion and domination. These two principal obstacles to the realization of the Enlightenment project. The above suggests that the first step towards the realization of the emancipation that empowers us and incorporate it into our frame of vision. This process should become our main focus in our social practice. Since the process of creation works on inclusion and empowerment, the greater the number of people who are empowered through their engagement in the process of creation, the more powerful we all are. The broader our approach to empowerment and inclusion is, the closer we are to the realization of the Enlightenment. This conclusion resonates with a variety of perspectives that have been increasingly visible and vocal lately in connection with a perceived deficit of democracy. These perspectives, such as deliberative, direct, and participatory democracy, critique liberal democratic theory and the elitist practices of modern representative democracy. They also advocate broad empowerment of all members of society and their inclusion into the process of democratic decision. Demands for broader empowerment and inclusion are not unproblematic. They raise a number of important theoretical and practical issues concerning the relationship between broad participation in decision making and hierarchies. In other words, between hierarchical and non-hierarchical interactions, between leaders and those they purport to lead. These issues have been examined in detail elsewhere and do not need to be revisited here. There is one question, however, that should be addressed for the purposes of this presentation. Is the continued existence of hierarchies an impediment to the realization of the Enlightenment project and the elimination of exclusion and domination? There are quite a few theoretical perspectives that address the issue of the continued existence of hierarchies. Common problem. They do not operate the process of creation in their frame of vision, and as a result, they see hierarchies and networks as ontologically separate, opposed to each. In addressing the problem of hierarchies and leadership, one should keep in mind that hierarchies and leaders are not fortuitous or arbitrary phenomena. They're not some tragic aberration in human evolution, as many opponents of hierarchies argue. They are a product of this evolution. Non-hierarchical interactions require regulation. Regulation represents a level of organization that is more powerful than that of the entities it regulates. Organization means hierarchy. The principal function of regulation is reflective. In other words, it is non-local, capable of detaching from and reflecting on the entire system and all the interactions among its subsystems. Because of their location, liminal space between the system and its environment, hierarchies and leaders that perform this function are in the position to reflect critically, that is, observing the system and also themselves as part of the system at the same time, on all interactions among the agents, subsystems of the system. The latter, by virtue of their position, can reflect only on local interaction. For this reason, leaders are in the position to perceive new and more powerful levels of organization created by all interactions, as well as recognize, promote, and facilitate the consolidation of these new levels of organization. Their role in this capacity has nothing to do with command and control, that is, transmitting decisions from top down, overseeing their implementation. Leaders must appreciate the enormous creative power of local interactions and be closely attuned to their variations. They rely on or supervene so much on what they do on these interactions. They should promote, regulate, and facilitate, not obstruct and disrupt these local interactions by trying to dominate. It is a sensitive, delicate, and highly creative role that involves both cooperation and two-way adaptation. This role also has an enormous creative component, since systems constantly evolve that require integration of their local and global operations. This integration is the function of leadership. In order to integrate local and global levels, leaders must express operations on the global regulatory level in terms of local interactions. This task requires the creation of a level of organization that has sufficient power to incorporate both local and global operations of the system as its potential. It is a highly creative role that ensures the continued evolution. The relationship between the leaders and those they lead cannot be one of domination. It requires cooperation and close interaction, the common creative work that sustains the evolution of the entire system. Such cooperation can only be effective if there is a balance between hierarchical and non-hierarchical interactions, hierarchies, network. Leaders should not see their role as that of ultimate arbiters, whose word is final. Far from it. Rather, their role is that of co-creating common enterprise of creating new levels of organization and ensuring the survival and evolution of systems. The evolution of human systems vitally depends on mechanisms and procedures for making decisions, the basis of rational and objective criteria. The perspective that incorporates the process of focal point offers the possibility for an inclusive and non-relativistic validation of knowledge and decision making. There is an extensive body of literature that discusses inclusive ways of validating knowledge and making decisions. Although it documents numerous differences and even disagreements, the contributions on this subject outline some general requirements. These are justifications and empirical verification. The approach that follows from the perspective outlined in this paper differs from the existing. As has been indicated earlier, the combinatorial power is what distinguishes one level of organization of reality from another. Therefore, we can use combinatorial power, in other words, inclusiveness, as one important criterion for validating knowledge and decision. The more inclusive a decision, an approach, or theory is, the greater is its combinatorial capacity, and therefore, the greater is its validity. Legitimate disagreements should not trigger power struggle, where one perspective seeks to delegitimize and eliminate another. Rather, they should motivate the creation of new and more powerful and more inclusive levels of organization that would dissolve current dissonance. This new level should have sufficient power to incorporate all competing points of view, including one's own, as particular cases, such comprehensive whole. Such approach will stand in stark contrast to the dominant current practice in knowledge production and decision making that is based on consensuses and exclusion of difference. Hierarchies seek control over knowledge production and decision making and silence alternatives. Control over funding, exposure, publishing, appointments, and simply brute force provide ample opportunities to enforce orthodoxy. More often than not, knowledge production turns into an exercise of power, or rather domination. We can no longer afford a system of validation that depends on conformity and access to power. An efficient, democratic, and open system of knowledge production and decision making should be based on a better understanding of what constitutes knowledge and how it is produced. Such system requires the institutionalization of more open, inclusive, democratic, and ultimately more rational practices, validating knowledge and allocating. As has been stated earlier, the more inclusive a knowledge system is, more extensive it is its combinatorial capacity, the more powerful it is. Inclusiveness and power, the Gödelian sense, not conformity to dominant trends, should be the most important criterion in assessing knowledge and decisions. Critical awareness and introspection is another important criterion. We often pay lip service to critical judgment and just as often forget that critical judgment concerns first and foremost our capacity to examine critically our own premises, organizing self-evident truth. We should exercise a conscious and deliberate control over our own truths and unconscious biases, rather than allow old and tired ideas that hinder knowledge production to dominate. Critical awareness is essential for the efficiency of knowledge production. Decisions we make, be they about managing our enterprises, organizations, or governments, should always be guided by one and only one consideration. They should be always focused on the continued evolution of the process of creation of new and more powerful levels and forms of organization of reality. Our decisions cannot be based on control derived from authority of a hierarchy. Such approach is hardly rational. There is only one source of power for us humans. That is the new and more powerful ways in which we organize reality, including our own mind. The organization of human systems, including our civilization, the structuring of our public space reflect this understanding. The above describes only some of the aspects of the realization of the Enlightenment project. We can realize this project only by going beyond the Enlightenment. This paper has only touched on this rich subject full of internal complexity. We're still at the very beginning of the path that leads to the implementation of this grandiose task. As we advance along this path, we will encounter many problems, identify many new issues, and offer new solutions. And this paper, as this paper has argued, the project of the Enlightenment is, by definition, by the very fact that it must be based on inclusion, cannot be the work of one individual or even a group of individuals. It must involve the entire human race. And now, a brief conclusion. The paper argues that our civilization can realize the emancipation project and eliminate domination. As this paper has shown, power and reason are intimately related, and both are related to freedom. In fact, all three have the same source. They all originate in the process of creation of new levels and forms of organization of reality. We have inherited this process from the evolution that preceded the emergence of the human race. In order to survive and prosper, our civilization utilized to the fullest extent possible the enormous potential of the process of creation. We as a civilization should fully embrace the process of creation and make it the central organizing principle of our social practice.